Thanks, Dwayne. It's a pleasure to kick off, although I'm going to be brief because the real meat of this afternoon's webinar is in PragMagic, the tool that will be explained in a little while. And to put that in perspective, it's good to speak a few words on real-world evidence and where pragmatic trial design comes in. And this slide sort of summarizes what we're talking about when we talk about the need for real-world evidence, and that is that clinical trials have been instrumental in providing evidence on the benefits and risks of drugs, but they typically give an average effect in a rather selected population that was felt adequate for that particular study. And in real life, the patients to which then the results are going to be applied might differ in many ways, like being older, having a different liver or renal function, all of which may modify the response to the drug, be it the benefits or the risks. And in order to be translating what is being found in clinical trials to patient populations that you care for as a physician or as a country with confidence, it is important to have data generated from trials that are as close as possible to what the real-world application is. Because as you see on this slide, patients outside trials may be different from patients inside trials. They may decide not to be very compliant to what you prescribe. They may be believers, or their physicians may be believers. They may take all sorts of co-medications or have comorbidities that are not allowed in the previous clinical trials, and that may change from the ideal drug effect under ideal circumstances to what is observed in real life. Sometimes the benefits of interventions may even be higher. So for example, when there is a strong placebo effect, that is something that's typically filtered out in a conventional randomized trial, and it might still be very useful in practice. But also strategies and adherence to strategies may be very different, and therefore effects may also be significantly less than perhaps estimated from ideal circumstances. This all has led to a quest for evidence that's closer to real life, and that evidence comes in two forms. Basically, one is what's called observational studies. So this is patients in real life that use drug according to, or interventions according to real life circumstances, under real life conditions, with real life situations that may have an impact. The problem, however, is that comparison is hard because patients in real life tend to have a prescription because of a reason, an indication, and that is something that patients that are not using the drug typically don't have, and that may make them prognostically different. So this is really where randomization comes in. Randomization has been applied, designed for studies to create prognostic comparability, and that is something that has shown its great benefit in clinical trials, typical explanatory trials, and that can also be used in trials that have a much more real-life design, which are called pragmatic trials. So to summarize what pragmatic trials are about, pragmatic trials are typically randomized clinical trials that aim to better guide physicians and policymakers in choosing the optimal treatment. They tend to have clinically more relevant comparators and outcomes that speak more to the real life use and what is intended to be achieved. They tend to compare treatment strategies perhaps more than single drugs, thereby reflecting real life strategies better. And they tend to have populations that are as little selected as possible to, again, allow the generalizability of results across a wide spectrum of patients.
Thank you very much, Rick. We will now be passing to Iris Getz from Lilly, who will discuss this from an industry perspective. Iris, the floor is yours.
So how do you translate all this into a pragmatic trial protocol? You need to find representative patients and sites. You need to find out what is the clinically relevant treatment alternatives that you can compare your indicator treatment to. And you may have to adapt this to the local context because, as we all know, different regions, different countries have very different usual care treatment alternatives. You need to find the clinically relevant outcomes that are actually measured in usual care, or whatever is possible to adapt it so that it fits into a usual care environment. But you have to do all this while minimizing the impact on routine care. And this is often, as we saw in the analysis we performed in GetReal, very, very difficult. What is important is that you check that what you're planning to do as part of your pragmatic trial protocol is actually feasible. And if you see there are questions around it, you need to be very quick to adapt, because otherwise you end up with a trial that is actually not asking what you wanted or it's not answering the actual question that you had in your research question. So it's very important to go back and forth and check that what you're doing is giving you the answer that you're aiming for. So what are in more detail the ideal design considerations? So if you look at the sites and patients, you need to optimize the identification and the selection so that you can reduce the study startup time. You need to ensure that practitioners are representative to those who will prescribe the drug, and therefore their patients are also representative to the population you want to derive the results to. Ensure that the investigator sites have their infrastructure so that they can perform the trial. This is often not easy. Usual care sites are not often not familiar with clinical trials, so you may have to help them to build up their infrastructure. But all this needs to happen without interfering too much with the usual care. In terms of treatment, what is the definition of treatment? Are you aiming at the standard of care? So that's what is actually recommended in guidelines, or are you looking at routine usual care? Is that what is really happening as part of usual care? What about the variability? There are lots of differences in usual care in different countries and regions. In terms of outcomes, can the data be captured that will answer the research questions? Are these outcomes part of usual care? In terms of blinding, usually we don't want to blind the patient or the investigator, but we may want to blind the assessor. So is that something that is possible in the situation you're in? Are you prepared to follow up patients longer? Often pragmatic trials have outcomes that are longer term. This impacts on the costs and has an impact on the missing data you may face. Feasibility, very important question. How is the access to the drug? Who's paying for the drug? You need to consider the potential introduction of bias and impact on generalizability, depending on who's supplying the drug and how the payment approach is. The standard in a clinical trial is that the sponsor is supplying the drug and paying for the drug, but does this impact on the usual care? So does this impact on the generalizability? How much monitoring and training is required? We have a lot of things we need to do because a pragmatic trial is a clinical trial, but how can we reduce the impact on usual care? So if we look at an example of how this works in detail, we see that there are several forces at work that kind of interfere with each other. On the one side, we have the trial design elements, the ones I just went in through as an example, but we have all these operational challenges that are connected to these trial designs, and both actually impact on the generalizability, but also the validity, the precision, and also the acceptability of stakeholders and ethical review boards, for example. But very importantly, the resources you have are limited, so can you actually do the trial? And as an example, we have one from Thiert van Staar, who analyzed two studies, the VitroPro and ELANG study, and he actually wanted to see how the choices of sites, which in this case were general practitioners, impact on their generalizability, and how the training requirements could actually reduce the generalizability. In this very concrete examples, the VitroPro study, he addressed 59 100% of the sites that he connected to, 2/3 of them actually expressed an interest in taking part in this trial, but he ended up with only 4% of the sites actually recruiting patients. So this had a massive reduction in the generalizability of the data and the feasibility of the trial, because the participating general practitioners differed from those not participating. So the ELANG trial did not recruit sufficient numbers of patients to actually be evaluated. So very nice case studies to look at the difficulties of setting up a pragmatic trial as part of usual care. So all this kind of led to us into thinking that we need a tool. So that we can help study designers, but also people who are interested in pragmatic trial, setting up these trials from an educational basis. So whereas the Precis tool is a very short and nice and perfectly simple way of designing a more or less pragmatic trial in terms of the design choice, it doesn't really represent the complexity of designing a pragmatic trial well enough. Firstly, operational challenges in pragmatic trials are often different than those in explanatory trials, and because of the limited experience with pragmatic trials, they are often anticipated, and that's not covered in the Precis tool. It's not made for that. Secondly, the translation of the concept of pragmatic trials to a pragmatic trial protocol involves a way of thinking and balancing certain implications of design choices that we are simply not yet familiar with or experienced with. So we have to balance the minimal interference we aim for with routine clinical practice, because we need this to ensure the generalizability, with the requirements for example, the safety and monitoring. So we came up with a tool that we call PragMagic, and this is designed to cover both, and I will pass on to Everett, who is going to tell you a bit more how the whole kind of building this tool up happened from a gaming perspective. So thank you very much, and I hand over to Everett.
Thank you very much, Iris. I think one of the fascinating things about the PragMagic tool is the fact that there's been a gaming functionality that's been added in, and Everett, you've been running that, so we're very interested to hear how you focused on those aspects of the tool, so thank you very much.
Thank you. When we were first asked at IJsfontein to work on the PragMagic project, we were confronted with a lot of work that already had been done by the expert. We are not the validation experts, we're game designers. So we had to get to know this field and more or less own this field to make some interfaces for it. And the result of what was done already in the work package was a very thorough but very complex decision tree with many branches and difficult questions. And there was no actual way to make it simpler because simplifying would mean less nuance and therefore less quality in the end result, and the tool would become irrelevant for professional use. So in game design, we have some experience with making complex systems into a nice interface. We as gamers like this interface. This is nice and clear, you have everything at hand. This is a screenshot of what you might see during battle in a game like World of Warcraft. Remember that you're actually dealing with the characters that you see in the background. They are moving around and slashing each other with their swords. So this is the approach we kind of took. Take our user as a gamer kind of steering or controlling a complex system. If you look at game user experience, it's all about four things. It's making the user feel in control. It's not necessarily means that he is in control, but he has to feel to be in the driver's seat. Next thing is to give the user a clear goal. That can be a very complex goal, like saving the world, but it has to be clear at the same time to only to know what you're doing on the far end of the tunnel. The third one is giving the user constant feedback so you know what you're doing. You don't want to take a lot of actions over time and then see in the end what the result is. You want to adjust your actions according to the direct feedback that you get at any given moment. And the fourth one is to allow multiple strategies. So if I see that something is not working or I get stuck, I can try something else. So these are the four things that we keep in mind always when we design user experiences. And if we are confronted with a decision tree as complex as PragMagic, we still want to give the user a sense of control, a sense of where he is, where he's going, and he's not allowed to feel lost through to our design. Because being lost usually leads to three kinds of behavior. First one is to give up and quit. Second one is to focus on very small details and ignore the big picture. And the third one is to get it over with as fast as possible. These are obviously three things that we don't want to have in the behavior of people designing trials, because that's a very serious business. To pursue this goal, we or this experience or behavior with our user, we gave the user a very clear goal, and we did that in the form of a city that you see here. This is a fake, but a part of the screenshot that we actually use in the pragmatic tool. So there's a city in the center, and lighting the windows of the city and lightening the city is the goal of the user. It's a clear goal. This has nothing to do with trial design, but as complex as designing trials is, putting lights in windows sounds doable. Lights represent generalizability because this is the most important aim of the tool, to make pragmatic tool trials as generalizable as possible. The lit windows give you a rough idea of the progress. So you see here a lot of windows being lit compared to the last slide, and this gives constant feedback to the user. So every time you've answered some questions in the tool, some windows in some area of the tool will be lit. Also the sun that's coming up will give you an idea of where you are on the broader side. Then in the lower left side, you see some percentages on the dashboard, and the number of operational challenges they always keep the user up to date. So so the system gives feedback like this on different levels. You have a constant and clear view of what you're doing and where you are as opposed to the whole design. The system doesn't make any decisions for you. You have to do that yourself. You're in charge. You're in the driver's seat. But you can decide to experiment, to try things, and see what the result would be if you were going in that direction. The wheel that you see on the lower right side gives the user the opportunity to start wherever he or she wants. A list, although it might be not be meant hierarchical, still invites people to start at the top, like we read from left to right and from the top down. Looking at this, on all these levels, we keep our user in the driver's seat and give him the feeling that he is in control. From a game design perspective, we've designed an interface of the pragmatic tool like a cockpit of a plane or a car. Designing trials is not a game, and neither is the pragmatic tool, but it does give you the feeling of being in control. Now I give the mic back to Dwayne, and we proceed with Myra, I believe.
Thank you very much. So we're now going to bring in Myra, who's actually going to give a live demo of the tool. And we're very pleased to have her here. So Myra, this is now for you.
Yes, thank you, Dwayne. So let me start sharing my screen here. Okay, so maybe I can start talking already while we wait for the screen to come up. What I wanted to start with is that Rick, Iris, and also Ebert have set the stage, and what I want to show you now is the end product, the PragMagic tool, and I want to walk you through the functionalities of the tool. So what happens after you log in to PragMagic? You get a welcome screen with a short explanation about pragmatic trials, the aim of the tool, and the forces that at work that we try to capture in the tool, all of which have been discussed already today. You're not seeing that yet, do you?
No, we're not seeing. Are you seeing it on yours?
Yeah, I did just what we did last time.
I'm going to try it again.
Yes, please.
Okay, in the meantime, while Myra is getting sorted out here, we do have, we're sorry about that, folks. Technical problems do seem to occur sometimes. While we're waiting for Myra to get started, what we can do is we do have a couple polls we'd like to ask. We're very interested in the audience that we have today. So what we'd like to do is ask you in the audience a few questions. First off, we'd just like to know, can you please tell us what your function is? So where it is that you work. We're interested in your role or function and what you are currently engaged in. We have 200 of you currently online, so we just very much like to hear what your function is. So Rick, while we're waiting here, just a quick question. We've highlighted that in previous projects that many trial sites and many places are interested in implementing pragmatic trials, but there have been few examples of actual pragmatic trials being run. What are the current barriers to putting a pragmatic trial in place?
Well, there's a number of barriers. One is a not complete understanding of what pragmatic trials entail, in a full understanding of the design issues that one may face, so that trials that have started out as planned to be pragmatic turn out to be rather conventional in the eventual completion. So this is one reason why we created this discussion platforms and also educational material to create a greater awareness of what the pragmatism in pragmatic trials means. So that's one reason. The second is that there's many also bodies that play a role in judging the efficacy and safety and affordability of medication who have limited awareness of the potential that pragmatic trials have, although they were introduced some 30 years ago. It's only recent that there's a better understanding and appreciation of the power that pragmatic trials have in generating real-world evidence. So I think things will change, but indeed, so far, very good examples have been done.
Okay. Myra, do you want to give us a shot?
Yes,
again?
of course.
Okay, so I'm passing over to you. Thank you, Rick. There, success. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let's talk about the tool and actually have a look at the tool now. I'll start from the beginning. So after logging into PragMagic, you get a welcome screen with a short explanation about pragmatic trials, the aim of the tool, and the forces at work that we try to capture in the tool. And these have all been discussed already today, but I just want to repeat the aim of the tool and the concepts very quickly. So PragMagic is a decision support and educational tool for pragmatic trial design and protocol evaluation, which aims to increase the value and feasibility of pragmatic trials by giving insights to stakeholders. Starting point, as Iris already mentioned, is your research question, which drives the choices you make for the trial design elements towards a more or less pragmatic trial. These trial design elements may have implications, among others, for generalizability of your trial results to the setting of interest, risk of bias and costs. Also, a design element can have specific operational challenges. These operational challenges may have their own impact on generalizability and the other implications. I'll show you how this is visualized in the tool. So you can design a new trial, or you can enter an existing project. If you want to design a new trial, you start with the trial information page, where you need to fill in some basic trial and contact information, but I'll show you this page later. If you choose an existing project, you go to the main page of the tool, which at the start shows a city in the dark, as David already showed you. Every time you answer a question on trial design elements, for example, which comparator you choose, windows in the city light up. And the game is to aim for the most generalizable trial by lighting up the front row of the city. So we start at the navigation wheel on the bottom right, where we see 7 domains pertaining to trial design, such as which participants to include in the trial, which sites to include, which outcomes to choose, etc. So let's say we want to develop a more pragmatic trial for a new once-daily oral asthma treatment that has recently come onto the market. We want to compare its effectiveness against usual care in routine clinical practice. If we open the participant domain, you see there are 5 trial design elements which are formulated as questions that we need to consider for a more pragmatic trial. Let's take a look at the second question, whether vulnerable patients can be included in the trial. And we can consider including, for example, adolescents in a asthma trial. So if we click on this question, we see there are 2 answer possibilities. And behind that, you see all 10 implications with the color coding. The first 3 are the methodological implications: generalizability, risk of bias, and precision. The next 5 are about acceptability of trial results, so for example, patients and HTA bodies. The last 2 are on feasibility of the trial. When we look at generalizability, we see that answer option A, which is to include vulnerable patient groups in a trial, in general, is the optimal choice for generalizability. If we then click on generalizability, we get a short explanation of the reasoning behind this. If we click on, for example, risk of bias, we see that no impact is expected on risk of bias of either answer A or B. For costs, however, and let me go to costs all the way down here, you can see that to include vulnerable populations may be less optimal, as with including as adolescents in our asthma trial, informed consent procedures may be more time-consuming, and necessary safety measures may also increase, influencing costs. If we now go back to the overview, next to the color codings, we also see an exclamation mark in some of the cells behind answer option A. This means there may be operational challenges involved with this answer, and that these challenges may have implications for generalizability, cost, and duration. If we click on the exclamation mark on the generalizability, we see what the operational challenges might be and how they could influence generalizability of the trial results. In our example, if caregivers would be less willing to ask adolescents to participate in the trial, generalizability of the study results to these patients would decrease. So with all the information we've seen about this question, we may now feel we have read enough about the pros and cons of choosing to include vulnerable patients in the trial to make a choice. So in this case, I choose to include vulnerable patients. I can add some information on my choice to the system by clicking on this button. For example, I could add that we consider to include adolescents. I can add that we then need to make sure that the recruitment strategy is tailored to this specific population, and also that we need to inform caregivers on the rationale of including these patients to make sure they are actually asked to participate. I can save this as an action note and then the notes in there. We can now continue to the next question by using the arrows below, which is whether to oversample subgroups. Let's say we do not want to do that. We can also return to the domain overview by using this arrow, where you now see that we answered 2 questions, of which one might have operational challenges, and that we added 1 note. If we close the domain overview, we see new lights being turned on in the city. And in the left bottom corner, we see that we answered 5% of our questions, although I'm not sure whether you can see the actual numbers in the shared screen. So let's take a look at another domain, that on site selection and recruitment. Here you can see there's 6 questions that we need to consider. One of them is that we need to determine the setting in which we want to perform our trial, which is question 2. Let's say we performed a recent asthma trial in secondary care, so we would be inclined to choose option B again. If we take a better look at generalizability here, we see that there is no immediate best choice for generalizability, but that it should be assessed whether the sites can select patients representative of future users. For asthma medication, most patients are treated in primary care, so in this case, a primary care setting would seem to be a better choice for generalizability. If we go back to the overview, we see that there do not seem to be negative effects on the other implications of this choice, but there are operational challenges involved with this choice, which may have their own effects on just several implications, as you can see here. By reading through these possible operational challenges, we can judge whether they are indeed a possible issue for our specific trial, and whether we can anticipate on them in the trial design, for example, by assigning dedicated study staff. So we now choose option C here. And again, lights go on in the city. If we would continue walking through the questions as we are doing now, they would stop dawning and the city would continue to light up. And I want to show you this in an already prepared trial design. So I'll leave this design and I open a new one. As you can see here, we now answered 70% of our questions. We have made 18 design choices for which we may encounter operational challenges, and we added 5 notes to the system. The sun is rising and many windows in the city have lighted up. Though not all of them are in the front row of the city, so there is something to gain with respect to generalizability of our choices. If you now open, for example, the comparator domain, which is by far the largest domain within PragMagic, you see all questions here have been answered. Hovering over the different colors and symbols, you can get a good overview of how you are doing with respect to generalizability, which you can see here, and the other implications, and also where your operational challenges may have an influence. You can revisit choices and tweak your design this way. So if we have a look at generalizability, we see there's quite some oranges here. For example, with question number 7. So we can revisit question number 7, which is what comparator is chosen. Look at the answer we gave here, and that's to include one usual care arm as comparator in the trial. We could increase our generalizability if instead we would choose option B, which is to include an usual care arm with a mix of usual care options. In other words, if we would leave the comparator choice completely up to the treating physician. Before making this choice, however, we should take a look at precision, which might decrease with this choice, and the possible operational challenges that are involved with this option. But for the demo, I think we showed you enough content, and I want to continue with some of the features of PragMagic. Because at this point, where you answered 70% of the questions, you may want to discuss your choices with colleagues. And the tool provides the opportunity to export an Excel report with information on all the choices you made, their implications, operational challenges, and the notes you added. You can also export a visual overview of the choices you made by choosing this option. 3 last features I want to point out are that by clicking on the trial name in the top left corner, you can see and adapt the trial information you entered at the start of the project. Clicking on the eye here gives you more information on the terminology used within PragMagic. For example, with respect to the concepts within the tool and the definition of the implications. And by clicking here, you can provide us with feedback on the tool, which we are, of course, always happy to receive. So I hope this short demo gave you a good impression of what you can find and do within the PragMagic tool. And I would like to finish with one slide. Yes, thank you, Dwayne. So to quickly recap, with PragMagic, we aim to facilitate the design and planning of more pragmatic trials by giving insight into the consequences of design choices and operational challenges, and visualizing the complex interplay in a systematic way. With this, PragMagic can help trial designers to maximize the generalizability of trial findings while ensuring validity and operational feasibility of the trial. The focus of PragMagic is on randomized pragmatic trials, for which at least one of the treatments involves the use of a drug. PragMagic is not a decision-making tool. It will not write your trial protocol for you, and it's also not a checklist to assure regulatory or ethical compliance. Neither does it give a quality verdict on your study design. It should simply aid trial designers and other stakeholders involved in pragmatic trials by giving insights. I'd like to finish off with 2 practical points. First is that after this webinar, PragMagic will be openly available at www.pragmagic.eu. And second, that during the pilot we experienced some freezes of the tool, specifically with Internet Explorer 11. And these should be solved by now, but if you do experience bugs, please let us know through the feedback button so that we can tackle them. And if possible, you can switch to another browser for the time being. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Myra. So you've mentioned that the tool is live.
Yes.
But you're having some issues with Internet Explorer. So the people can gain access to the tool simply by going to, can you give that website again, please?
Yes, if you go to www.pragmagic.eu, you can see a banner, and in it a button that leads you to the PragMagic tool. When you go to the PragMagic tool the first time, you need to register with some very basic information. You get a link into your email, and then you can freely access the tool.
That's great, thank you. And you're in, would you consider you're in the beta phase now, the debugging phase? Where are you at in the process? How far along do you think you are until you have a fully functioning tool?
Well, we have passed the beta phase. It should be fully functional by now. Mm-hmm. We just have some problems with Internet Explorer, which may have to do more with remote desktop using, as we do here as well with Citrix, which are a bit hard to tackle. Yeah. In the other browsers, we do not experience these problems anymore.
Mm-hmm. From a game perspective, Peter, how different was this from your normal job? Like how easy was this to incorporate into your normal paradigm?
we had some challenges doing this.
Sure.
And one of the main reasons being that the pragmatic tool doesn't evaluate or judge the decision that you make. In general, in game design, you know if a decision is right or wrong, or gives you a power-up, or gives you points, or gets your character killed. So here we had less resources for feedback, so to say. So to make an objective tool that is still aiming at the same motivational aspects that we use in game user experience, that was a switch for us and pretty difficult. But I think we've managed to in the end, together with the team, make a tool that in the pilot phase many participants actually called fun to use. So that was
not something that's normally.
It was one of our aims to get there.
I'd like to point out that we're now opening the question and answer session. If anyone would like to ask a question, please use the question bar in your tool. We will take questions as they come in. I would also like to share the poll we took. So as you can see, 70% of you on the webinar today are from the industry, which is to be expected. You would probably want to utilize this tool. So thank you very much. We are going to ask another question right now, which is, would you like to be contacted by the Get Real staff of PragMagic to find out if you can have access to this tool? Can we send you information directly to contact you, send you a link so you can try and use this on your own? So please, we'll leave that poll open for the time being. We do have a question here from Jesus Medina. Thank you very much, Jesus. He says, congratulations. It looks like a very helpful tool to help you think through the pragmatic design. Does the system allow selection of multiple answers to a question? For example, related to the demo, you may want to include some vulnerable patients or patients with a vulnerability, i.e. the elderly, but not others, or perhaps specific comorbidities. How much flexibility is there within the context of the tool?
Yes, very, very interesting question. We did talk a lot about how we could implement that. What we discussed is that if you can have multiple answers, that will not, also with the gaming element, it would not really work. You have to make decisions there. However, the questions are asked in a way that you can then in the note system add your specifics of which vulnerable patients you would want to include in your trial. And because the notes are exported in the Excel as well, you can easily use that for internal discussions or for starting your trial protocol.
Mm-hmm. Iris, are you with us? I'd like to ask you from your perspective, how useful are going to be incorporating some of these comorbidity issues for pragmatic design? Do you see that as something that would be helpful?
I think it would be helpful, but it would be probably helpful in a kind of an advanced version of the tool where we not only look at comorbidities but other specifics that could do with disease areas, so that you actually provide more background information for a specific disease area, or if it's done by a drug company, like many of their participants are coming from a drug company, you may have a specific interest in specific treatment forms. So I think it is all interesting. It's a question what is feasible and how you can extend it in maybe more advanced versions to actually include some more specific backgrounds on disease and treatment.
Sure. Thank you very much, Iris. I'm going to share with you the poll. So 61% of you would like to be contacted by the PragMagic team. Thank you very much. We will be passing that information out to the folks at Get Real, and I'm sure they will be in contact soon after the webinar. Divya Babar asks, are these exhaustive questions one needs to consider for pragmatic trials? I think it's how many open-ended questions can we, sort of how long is a piece of string, right? Yes.
Yes, well, that sort of answers it, but within reasonable limits, we've tried to be comprehensive. There has been an enormous amount of discussion by many involved in the preparation of this tool that eventually led to these questions. And of course, we've tried to collapse some of the questions to broader categories, like the previous question was about vulnerable patients. Now there may be subgroups of particular vulnerable patients that are not literally mentioned, but in that situation, the sort of impact of such a decision is that because it means a certain degree of selection, because you cannot generalize to those patients that were included, particularly because they were vulnerable, that will limit generalizability. On the other hand, it might be a limitation to generalizability that you're well aware of, and therefore it doesn't really harm the purpose of the study. But I think that we're fairly comprehensive, but we're still interested in any comments that you as users may have for areas in which we sort of missed some elements, but we're pretty confident that by and large this covers what needs to be covered.
That's great, thank you. There's a Raphael Rotin who has asked, in using the tool, are all of the entries that a user makes private to the PragMagic individual user, or are they stored for other users to view? In other words, are you going to keep the behavioral, are you and Igor going to analyze the behavioral approach online and then do analytics and improvement on the tools going forward?
Shall I take this one? No.
You both could probably approach it, I suppose.
The way it's set up now is that you have your personal login, and by having that login, it means that the information you enter there is private, so it's visible only to you logging in with that account. If you make an account for a study and you share that with your team, then it's visible to your whole team. It's private. You're the only one who can look at it. It's not secured as it would be like on the side of a bank. I mean, we did not put that security in, but we cannot share it, we will not share it, and we do not look at it. So I think that covers the question.
So,
all right.
So again, we have a similar question here from a John Sheehan, just making sure that the trial design, obviously some of this could be 70% of the users are industry, there's competitive intelligence here. You will not be sharing the types of trials that people are sniffing around on.
No, we definitely do not share that. We can imagine we had some discussions with our industry partners as well, that for some industry partners that would not be enough, that this would need to be on a very secure site. In these cases, we advise not to put very confidential information on it. And this is something that we can take along. If people really want to do that, that's something we would take along for next version to see if we can put it on a different security system.
Mm-hmm. So from my perspective, what I'm interested in is, is this still a work in progress? I mean, do you see that you're going to still be improving this based on feedback, or you still see a development period in play? Or do you see this as now done, dusted, we're moving on? How do you see the tool?
No, the hallmark of science is that it's constantly moving and in progress. So, and that would apply to the design of studies also. So, I think this is state of the art as it stands now, but it will certainly evolve and be tweaked and probably improve by user input in the future. So we intend to keep this alive and keep it up to date. Alongside other activities that GetReal is carrying out. So we intend to have GetReal transform into a sustainable platform with several tools, of which PragMagic is one, but not the only one. There's more to benefit from, we believe, from what has been done in GetReal. So short answer is it will stay alive and evolve.
Iris, I'd like to come back to you again. From your perspective at Lilly, how much uptake do you potentially see with tools like this in Lilly's internal processes of actually picking up and using pragmatic trials going forward? Do you see this as something that will aid in the usability from an industry standpoint?
Yes, definitely. I think like many other industry partners, we had a surge in interest within Lilly to do pragmatic trials, and over the last 10 years we had difficulties sometimes to overcome the operational challenges, and this was one of the reasons why we participated in this GetReal project and actually participated as co-lead in Work Package 3 because we were interested in that. So these tools are all helpful. I think they can serve primarily as an educational tool to start with, and we have to then see, given the kind of all the safety issues issues we just discussed in terms of confidentiality and all that, whether we could use it as a kind of tool that where we can give any further detail about the trial we're looking at. But I think as a kind of tool where different study teams sit together with various backgrounds from medics, stats and health outcomes and safety and so on, it's a fantastic discussion tool where you can discuss your aims of what you're trying to achieve and go through the tool, even if you don't want to enter any details verbally, and actually think through what are the issues we're facing with and how can we deal with them. So I see it at the moment as a kind of a combination of an educational and actually act on tool, and I think there's definitely potential to expand it into something that can be used as a kind of way to go when we design a trial.
We have a sort of a technical question here from Raymond Hutavesi, which is, are there any sort of methodological approaches going on, Bayesian methods or sequential, adaptive group sequential methods going on in the background of PragMagic? I mean, what are your comparators and how are you actually doing the comparison of the various data sets?
This is Rick. This is multiple questions, but to start with the group sequential and adaptive designs, that's not the primary interest of PragMagic. The adaptation of a trial design during its run is something that is currently more typical if you exclude stopping rules. But adaptation is currently something that's more typical for early phase trials, in which the trials tend to be more explanatory than pragmatic. And in pragmatic trials, you could envision that you have adaptations, but these adaptations then should be guided by the same principles that guided your initial design. So if there is good reasons to, during a study, modify the trial design in such a way that it becomes more generalizable, then that would serve the purpose of a pragmatic trial. And I could envision that that's being done. But that's not something that is really built into the current proposition. The current proposition is about the contrast. It's about, whether adopted or not. It is the contrast in intervention. It's about selection of patients. It's about co-interventions. It's about all those factors that may modify the eventual results of study and therefore affect validity. Bayesian statistics, second component of this question. We're not talking too much about the data analytical side of it, and much of what you will learn from PragMagic will apply to whatever type of analysis you do, be it more Bayesian or more frequentist.
So we've got another question here from Peter Fenici. I hope that's correct, to be Fenici. Thank you, Peter, for your question. Would the IMI Get Real academic team use the data for research purposes? In other words, build on the data that you have for doing more research, I guess, or the collection. I guess that's, would you use the data that people's behavioral approach online? Would you then use that for more research?
Well, in a meta sense, yes. We'll, of course, monitor how much it's being used, and we will closely look at whatever comments come in, but not currently, as was explained by Mira, by utilizing data that people enter for their own purposes. That is something that we will stay away from. We might, of course, design studies in which we invite people to use the package and have their consent to then utilize that data to learn more about it. But it's not something that will be done routinely on the data that people enter into the system.
Now, what we do ask routinely is whether we can contact you to give feedback on the tool.
And we've collected, about 61% of the people who are online have done that, and we will do so. Well, one final question before we wrap up here. We've seen that, okay, there's certainly from the industry side, from the patient side, there's a willingness, from the researcher side, there's a willingness to try out new things like pragmatic trials, adaptive trials. We saw the Salford study. We've seen an actual approach to using these materials, but yet there's still a barrier from the actual regulatory side, actually putting these in place, making it happen from an actual nuts and bolts deliverable for a new therapy in the market. How far away are we from actually seeing pragmatic trials become part of the lexicon for approvals? And how do you think PragMagic will play into that?
I think the best for pragmatic trials is yet to come. It's really we are in an era in which we've seen the limits of what can be achieved using conventional trial designs, that is explanatory trials. And indeed, I would agree that regulators might still be somewhat hesitant to take these design options on board. And one reason is, of course, that the less there is known about a certain intervention, the more difficult it is to leave some of the conventional design options aside. So early in the drug development process, we believe it will be harder to do pragmatic studies, but we feel that even, and that was a particular interest of GetReal, even before registration, there's options to build in pragmatic elements. And in order to do that in a sensible and responsible way, we think that a tool like PragMagic may be of use. So you are in late phase clinical trial design, that is pre-registration. You want to consider what the options are, and then PragMagic may help guide you through those options so that you can make informed decisions, which could even be checked with regulators whether they would be eventually acceptable in the submission of the findings for registration.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to add. The last point you mentioned, we had some discussions with regulators, and they also said for them it's a moving field as well. So they're really open to early dialogue, and they are also very driven by the research question. So if you do have a more pragmatic research question and you align your trial design elements with that, they are open to discussing whether that's a possibility, whether that's acceptable from a regulatory perspective.
And Iris, from the industry perspective, how far away do you think we are from a Lilly, a GSK in the UK, trying to put this through? How far along do you think we are?
I think we're probably more at the beginning than in the middle. I think there are lots of questions we need to answer and also understand the acceptability of us in industry doing these trials. So there are question marks about, whether a potential start pre-launch of a pragmatic trial could then delay the launch of a drug that we want to market. So I think at the moment we would like to get the design right. So we want to get the science right, understand the issues so that we learn from the difficulties, and I think GetReal was an optimal platform to do so and understand what the impact of operational issues are on generalizability and validity, precision and so on. I think this was a fantastic baseline, but we need to now understand how we can actually transfer this in a practical world, and how regulators, payers, but also physicians and patients are willing to participate in these trials, because obviously without them we can't do these trials. So I think we're more at the beginning, but I think we have started, so that's already a big progress from a couple of years ago.
That's fantastic. Myra, again, just one last time, please give us the web address for PragMagic.
www.pragmagic.eu.
www.pragmagic.eu. Everyone please go there.
You can Google it.
Sign up. Thank you very much. On behalf of the team here at Utrecht, Rick, Myra, Ibert, thank you very much. And Iris, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we conclude this webinar. Thank you very much for your presentation. Good afternoon.